Hello, everyone. Welcome to the last and final live for this January. Today, we're going to be talking about expectations versus reality when teaching in Spain. So stay tuned. I'm going to invite Grace, the current ambassador for Spain, to join me, and then we'll get the conversation rolling. So just give me a few minutes here, and we'll get her. Perfect. Hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. I don't know if we can hear you. Okay, can you say hello one more time?
Hello. Can you hear me?
It sounds like you're a little far away.
Oh, let me try this. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you? Let me see if I can do something else. One second. Is this a little better or worse?
It's good. It's good.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We got a little hello in the comments there.
Hey.
Hello, Chrissy. um, so yeah, today we're going to be talking about expectation versus reality. And so I think to start, I'll go through some of the expectations that I kind of had in mind when thinking about teaching in Spain, but then we can get into it. But first, let's do a little introduction. So if you want to introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Sure. So, my name is Grace. I'm originally from New York, specifically on Long Island. I decided to teach in Spain around this time last year and came to the first September orientation back in this past fall. And now I've been here ever since and working for CIE. Love it.
Yeah, nice. Well, and so my name is Rachel Dietz. I'm the CIE TEFL advisor. I also taught abroad in Spain, so you have two of us today with lots of experience with teaching in Spain. And so let's jump right into it. So I have my notes here on my phone. I think the first expectation, we're just going to go right to the point here. The expectation is that you'll get to travel every weekend. I know Grace has some thoughts on this.
I do have thoughts on this, and I felt like that before I came to Spain, that I expected to do a lot of traveling because a lot of my experience of people that I knew who went abroad previously were people who had studied abroad. So I didn't really know of anybody else who, besides like a handful of people I distantly knew who had studied taught abroad before. So my expectation mirrored what a lot of other people's study abroad experiences looked like. And that's kind of what I expected for myself. And when I imagine that, it's people who study abroad and they're in a different city every weekend, a different country. And it doesn't help that I feel like a lot of people back at home were fueling those expectations by telling me that flights abroad are so cheap and it's so easy to travel. And I think when you put things into perspective of traveling from America, it's definitely a lot cheaper. But when it comes to traveling from country to country, I guess I anticipated the flights being less than 100 euro. That was just kind of the idea that I was spun. So that's the idea I was going off of. And I had to imagine that it had to be something around that if these people were going every single weekend. But it turns out like the average price for a flight, even the cheapest airline like Ryanair, Wizz Air, ends up being between like 80 to 120 euro. And when you're living off of 1,000 euros a month and you're looking to travel, I know personally my like travel budget per month is like 200, like that without besides before my tutoring money, right? So to going off of 200 euro and spending already 120 on a flight, you're left with about like 80 euro when you're there. And that's kind of defeating and anxiety inducing because you feel like, what are you gonna be able to do there? But I will say that there's ways around it, like booking in advance. Um, a lot of times, like we'll book the flight and not worry about like our hostel or where we're gonna stay for a few months in advance. So like getting those flight prices in is super important. And something that I feel really fortunate about is that because traveling to other countries is so expensive, I did a lot of traveling within Spain, which I think when people study abroad is relatively rare because they're so antsy to jump around to a bunch of different countries that the big thing that people say is they didn't spend enough time in their own city or their own country. So I feel super fortunate to have seen so much of Spain, and I anticipate seeing even more of it soon, actually. So looking back, I feel like I'll hopefully travel the rest of my life, but you won't have many opportunities to travel to these small cities around Spain. So I think that is a flip side of the negative, which is you don't get to travel maybe as much as you
Yeah.
anticipated.
Yeah, totally. I think there is a lot to say about planning ahead of time. I was terrible
Yeah.
when I was teaching abroad. And I think, I always recommend to folks to take a look at the academic calendar, even,
Yeah.
um, and to try to plan if you want to travel. I also always thought that 3 days, even though you get a 3-day weekend, was a little short sometimes to
Right.
go to destinations that you've been dying to go to. Like I had always wanted to go to Rome, but I thought seeing Rome in 3 days was going to be too short for my liking.
Yeah.
And
I was actually,
so,
I was just there for 4 days and I felt like I
yeah,
blinked. I felt like I literally blinked and it was over.
was
But
huge. Yeah.
but I will say that like something that my friends and I have now started contemplating because of the prices of travel has gotten so expensive. Like there's certain places that before you get here you kind of like anticipate traveling to. Like Italy is a classic one of them. Maybe like Paris, right? Or like London, like a lot of the hot spots. And of course those hot spots, the flights are going to be the most expensive. So my friends and I have been looking and trying to justify because on top of the flight, you got to pay for a place to stay. And then, like, the more days you're there, the more money you spend. So, we're trying to, like, right now justify, like, is 120 euros worth it to have 24 hours in London? Like, at least you don't have to pay for a place to stay. It's like we have one day, see the city, and come home. And, like, while that might not be the ideal experience, it's like if that's somewhere you're dying to go see, that might just be the route that you have to end up taking. And I think like that's something me and my friends are going to start looking into a little more because when you book a trip for a whole weekend, you don't anticipate it being that expensive, but then you're paying breakfast, lunch, and dinner all those days, your activities, tickets to go see things. So that's a strategy we're going to start taking as well.
Yeah, absolutely. When I love that you've really taken advantage to see more around Spain. I think my favorite thing about Spain is the rail system.
Yeah.
And being able to travel by train is such a game changer, I feel like.
Yeah. And like my friends and I, like one of my favorite trips to date was to Cuenca, which is like this
Mm,
little teeny tiny town in rural Spain. And it's like an hour and a half train ride there. And we didn't anticipate like how much time we probably could have spent there, but we had a train there like 7 a.m. and we did leave till 7 p.m. And that's the kind of city you can see in like 4 hours.
mhm.
So to have like 12, we really just like spent time in restaurants and like walked everywhere. And when people say like, oh, Toledo or Segovia, those are places you can do in a couple hours. Like I look back at my 12 hours in Cuenca and that's one of my favorite trips because like the whole way home on the metro, I mean on the train, there's like a restaurant, like in a little bar area. Like we sat up at the top of the train and like we're having drinks on the train. Like it's so silly, but like those kind of trips are like what ends up being my favorite.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the short trips are always the best. My favorite trip in Spain, which was very unexpected, was Logroño. That was like top-notch travel.
Yeah.
So if anyone is wanting for like a really fun trip, relatively expensive from Madrid especially, that's the one I would
Good to know.
highly, highly
Good to know.
recommend. Great. Well, yeah, so traveling might not be traveling every weekend, but there's definitely things that
Yeah.
you can do.
And
Um,
like I anticipated looking at the school
mm,
calendar and seeing like days that the school has off and anticipating traveling those days because it feels like a
mm,
no-brainer. Like if I don't have school, like why don't I travel? But neither does anybody else, so the flights are usually the most expensive then. And I've actually found like within just this past year of my experience, like the days you have off from school, there's usually a reason and there's
mm,
always so many fun things going on in your actual city. So like if you feel as though like you can't travel over a holiday, like do not feel upset because lots of times there's like that day I don't know I forget what it was called. Like my friends and I were joking that it's like Spanish 4th of July. It's like in the fall. It's like not really it's obviously not actually Spanish 4th of July, but like it was like a day off from school that we had to make it like a 4-day weekend
mhm.
and we couldn't go away and we were so bummed. But there was parades all in the street. There was like a million people out. It was like such a fun day here in Madrid that I'm so glad we didn't travel because we wouldn't have been able to experience that. So like
Yeah.
that's also something to keep in mind too, I think, when you have days off.
Yeah. Yes, the 12th of October.
There it is.
That's a good one.
That's it. It is.
Yeah, I mean, and it's usually beautiful weather too.
It
So
was
anytime
beautiful
that you
out.
can
Yeah.
spend outside, picnic in Retiro was never a bad plan. So
Yeah.
um, cool. Well, I guess the next expectation is that my school needs my help in the classroom.
Oh,
So yes, let me
no.
know your thoughts.
So, like, coming from I have like a rare experience of like teaching also in America. So, like, coming from a super structured environment of teaching in America and being when you're a teacher in the United States, like, and there's an additional set of hands in your classroom, oftentimes you're like, thank God you're here. Like, I could really use your help. And like, you're like put to work, right? Like a co-teacher in America. But so coming into this, that's similar to what I was anticipating. Like, they'll really be appreciative of my help and I'll be definitely put to work. And while they're definitely appreciative of my help, oftentimes they're just most appreciative of me just physically being there and talking to the kids in my American accent in English. So, like, a lot of what I do is like busy work where, like, I'll be in the back of the classroom, like, cutting up posters, cutting up activities for the kids to be doing on the side, or cutting up like translation cards for the kids to be using like as manipulatives. And every so often the teacher in the front of the room will say like, how do you pronounce, like today I was asked like, how do I pronounce iguana, like
Mm,
as in an American accent. And I'm just like, once you say it and then you kind of move on. So there are days where I'm pulling kids out of the room to give like assessments, which are usually speaking exams, and that also sounds super daunting. But all that consists of for my second graders, for example, is they're learning the five senses in English, and I just have to like point and they say like, I see with my eyes, I smell with my
mm,
nose, I taste with my mouth, and I just check check check. It's like not rocket science, and that's kind of the most strenuous work that I do. So while my school is super appreciative and they love hearing my ideas, like they also aren't totally reliant on you. And it's also important to note like we work like 16-hour weeks
mhm,
and they're there and a whole day without us. And on top of that, like lots of times you can leave school early on certain days or get there later. Like you're not needed every period all day.
mhm.
So there are times you're not there and they still survive. So they just appreciate when you are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not, I mean, you're there as a
Right.
support, right? To support as you can. And I think the biggest thing is just to have no expectations going into to your school placement, because it could change,
Right.
right? I mean, it's not going to be exactly like Grace's experience. It's not going to exactly be like my experience. I had a very involved role in the classroom, but I mean, it could be very hands off,
Right.
and that's fine too.
Like my orientation roommate
Mm,
actually, she was placed in a vocational school,
mm,
and it's like mostly adult males, and it's actually in like a piloting school. So
mm,
it's like adult males who are going to school to be pilots who are also learning English, and that's obviously not what you anticipate getting as a role in a secondary
yeah.
placement when you come here in Spain. And initially, obviously, she was very overwhelmed and did not know how to handle it. But she ended up really liking it because, like, you find pros in everything, right? Like, they get her, they understand her sarcasm, they understand her humor.
Mhm.
And she got to, like, really get into, like, detailed conversations with them where I'm, like I said, talking about, like, eyes, nose, ears, mouth. So, where everything is super different and everyone's roles are differently involved, I think there's like pros and benefits to all of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There's opportunities everywhere. You just have to be kind of open-minded to what could happen, because you never know the pros and cons that might
Yeah.
arise.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Well, the next expectation is I want to live in the city center of Madrid. So I want to live in Seoul. I want to live in Malasana. I want to live in Chueca. What's the reality on
Right.
that?
So, the reality on that is just as anyone would expect, and everybody wants to live
Mm,
there. So, like supply and demand, it's going to be expensive. And where you only it comes down to preference honestly and how prepared you come into this, because if you come into this relying solely on your 1,000 euros a
mm,
month, living in the middle of the city center is probably not the best option for you. Even if you can physically afford it, out of that 1,000 euros you're not going to be left with much, like you're not going to have much left over. I would say like the average price of rent within the city center is anywhere between like upwards of 500 to 700, 800 a month. And that's just unfortunately the reality because the prices have increased and that's just where everybody wants to be. So if you're willing to spend that much and you're prepared to come in with money from like back at home and like jobs outside, then that's totally fine. But it's better to go into that with a clear head
Hmm.
instead of when you arrive and you begin your initial search of a place and you become shocked that you're gonna have to look elsewhere. And elsewhere doesn't mean like middle of nowhere. It could just
Mm.
mean like 3 metro stops away. And it truly does make all the difference in not only your rent, but the price of your groceries and the price of everything around you.
Hmm.
Because when you're living in the middle of the city, your produce, your groceries, the food, ordering takeout, like eating at restaurants, that's all going to be a lot more expensive because it's catered toward almost like a tourist price, where when
Hmm.
you're living like even like 3 metro stops away, it really does make all the difference of the prices. Like I do happen to live in the city center, and I found myself when I go tutor grocery shopping and bringing some stuff home sometimes. Like I stop at the Mercadona it's about a 45-minute metro
Mm.
away, and the prices is just crazy, like the difference. So
Yeah.
that's a strategy, and it's something to consider when you're hoping to live into the city, move in the city, but like there is pros and cons.
Yeah. Yeah, I think two things I'll add to that is definitely be open to having roommates.
Yeah.
I think that number one, it helps you to reduce the cost of your rent, but also it can increase or enhance your experience overall. The more people that you can get to know, especially if they're built into your housing situation, I feel like even the better. And number two, definitely looking outside of the city center. Madrid has so much to offer.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to get out of the center of the city and to just to get to know the city that you're living in.
Right. And like I think on top of that, when it on building off of like you saying to be open to roommates is like something that I experienced is even with a roommate, unless you are, and I guess this is a given in any city you move to, right? But it's
Mm.
like unless you are making active plans to go meet up with somebody, when you're living in a foreign country and you don't maybe necessarily speak the language, it's easy to kind of feel isolated, even if you're constantly surrounded by people, because you have to put in that effort to make these conscious plans. And lots of times, unless you're meeting up in the park or you're doing something like very low budget, that oftentimes includes spending money, which people sometimes are like hesitant
Mm.
towards. So there's a lot to say about like just being surrounded by people and living with people, because being in good company does make all the difference, especially like on school nights, on nights you're not traveling. It really does help.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think another thing that is big for people who are wanting to teach in Spain is they want to improve their Spanish, right?
Right.
So, looking for other people that have similar goals, maybe even living with Spanish
Yeah,
people, even getting further outside of the city center so you can be around more locals can always help you further achieve those
for sure.
goals. So, always something to think about. And again, Madrid is such a huge city. I always tell people that Madrid is a very uh, kind of personality based city. There's something for everyone. So, depending on what you like to do, what hobbies you're looking to get into, or things that you want to continue that you have at your life at home that you want to do in Madrid, really do some research before you leave too,
Totally.
and figure out, where could I really delve in further to those different things. Like maybe I want to do dance classes. Where would those dance classes be? Can I find an apartment near there? Maybe. So
Right.
yeah, I see we have some questions rolling in. So maybe we'll take a quick pause
Sure.
from the overall theme and answer some questions. So the first question is, how did you find your tutoring
Okay.
jobs? I'll let you answer that one.
So I found tutoring jobs in a few different ways. My first tutoring job I actually got like through word of mouth, through friends of friends that like knew someone who was getting tutoring. It's like once you join CIEE, you make it here, you are in this massive WhatsApp group, and people are just throwing out information left and right. Even to this day, people will say, "Is anybody interested in a tutoring job at this metro station? DM me." So that's just one way I got mine. And then another way I got my tutoring jobs is through posting on Facebook. There's so many like auxiliary English speakers in Madrid Facebook group chats. And if you post your availability, how much you're going to charge, where you're located, and like what you're looking for, it's so easy to find people who are interested in learning Spanish. I mean, sorry, interested in learning English. They just, or even like they just want you to be with their kids and talk to them in English. Like I know one of my really good friends, one of her tutoring jobs is she has to pick kids up from school, bring them home, and just play with them for a half hour until the parents get home from work, but only talk to them in English. So like that's sometimes the extent of the tutoring, where like one of my tutoring jobs, I am with a 14-year-old boy and we're talking about like the perfect present tense of English. And I often find myself kind of having to study because I just speak English. I don't know exactly what that is, but so those kinds of jobs vary. But I know some people who just like stick letters in mailboxes in their apartment buildings with their WhatsApp number. People just like do dog walking, odd jobs. Like if you don't feel like you're someone who's qualified to work one-on-one with someone for tutoring, babysitting, dog walking, and like odd jobs, like just with your neighbors are often things that I know people do to also help like make a little money on the side.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, if you're looking for, this is a shameless plug, but if you're looking for a way to better prepare for not only teaching in the classroom, but also to market yourself better for tutoring, you can consider getting TEFL certified if you don't have a ton of teaching experience prior. There are a couple different options that you could do for teaching in Spain specifically. So if you are interested in learning more on that, you can get in contact with me directly. You can send us a DM on Instagram, or you can email me at tefl@cie.org. So yeah, had to throw that in there. I see Janelle, I can see that you're applying for the 2024 season. That's awesome. Congratulations. um, let's see. One other question was, did you learn Spanish prior to moving to Spain?
So I am like just a by my level of Spanish, I thought was at a higher level than it was actually. And when I was at a bit of a rude awakening when I arrived, because I had taken Spanish all through high school, parts of middle school, and even like 2 or 3 classes in college. But when you arrive here, the culture shock and everything combined, for me, it just like went out the window. But I will say, um, the more time you spend speaking it, being around it, hearing it, listening to it, music, books, like reading signs, shopping at grocery stores, you really do pick it up so quick. Um, I've become able to be a little conversational and definitely able to like function and order at restaurants, go to the grocery store, ask people for directions. I've definitely attained the necessary skills to survive. But before coming here, I thought I was confident, but I really wasn't. But I wouldn't say that to worry anyone, because despite that, I still feel, I would say by October, I was like relatively confident in my skills. And now I'm a lot more confident now that it comes January.
Yeah, I think that's normal too. I feel like, there is no expectation for you to know Spanish when you come to Spain. So you don't have to be self-conscious about not knowing Spanish. And I feel like a lot of people are going to be in the same spot as you. I think, again, that's another advantage with going with CIE or a program provider, because you're in a situation where there's a lot of people that are doing the same thing as you. And so you can kind of
Totally.
commiserate together on that. And there's lots of opportunities to learn. Madrid's a very international city, and so I think that's totally fine.
Yeah.
You're here to learn
And
Spanish.
I have to just say, like, if I weren't for CIE, I don't know what I would have done, because
Mm,
so much of the process here is totally in Spanish. Like a lot of
mm,
your visa process, a lot of your abono, like when you're getting your card to take the metro, when
mm.
you're applying for your TIE, like a bunch of things that are just kind of like paperwork and that you have to get done like legally to be here. And so much of that it's all of it is in Spanish. The documents are written in Spanish,
Yep.
and it's really hard to understand. Even like you take like Google Translate to it, it's like really, it's like paperwork in America that's in English that's hard to understand, but now put it in a different
Mm,
language. And CIE thankfully like spelled it all out for me. They told me exactly what I need to write, where I need to write it, and like how to navigate all that. So if that's worrying you, that you don't know Spanish and there's a lot of like legal documents that you're gonna have to take care of, I would not worry, because they help you every step of the way.
yeah, yeah. That's what sold me
Yeah.
doing the CIE program.
I would not be here actually.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we might come to questions more, but I wanted to make sure that we get back to some of the
Yeah.
things. I think um, another expectation that kind of leads in from the conversation we were just having is the expectation that I will be completely fluent in Spanish by the time I'm done teaching in Spain.
Um, that's interesting. I think like it's this definitely varies for everyone because it comes down to like who you surround yourself with. So I would say all of my friends are American who I spend the most time with. So besides in school, when I'm dealing with tutoring or I'm in like public spaces, I am speaking English. Where some of my friends live with people who speak Spanish and spend a lot of their times on the side speaking Spanish, not only like with fellow teachers or at tutoring or in public, like they're just speaking Spanish socially. So when you're forcing yourselves in those situations, you will definitely learn Spanish a lot quicker and eventually become fluent. I think if I put in more effort, I definitely would become a lot more fluent than I am. But it's easy to become comfortable in your own circle. And I've grown comfortable now in where I am with my friends, where I think we all kind of are in the same place and we're looking to go to intercambiando bars that like certain bars that you can go to for language exchanges.
Mm-hmm.
And those are something we've definitely become interested in because now that it's January, we're all coming to be a little self-aware that we don't know nearly as much Spanish as we thought we would by this point. And actually, wait, something else too is that a girl I tutor, she's like an older woman, like she's just looking to like refresh her Spanish, I mean, refresh her English. And she at first had offered me a Spanish lesson in return for an English lesson. And at the time, I was like, ooh, I'm broke. No, I just need money. And I was like, I'll learn Spanish on my own. But now, like, she's gotten really good at English. I'm almost tempted to say like yes, I will do a language exchange instead of tutoring for money, and I know other people who do that and they love it because they you pretty much have this one conversation in English and then you have it again in Spanish, which is really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, language exchanges are so important. I feel like it is true. It's a balance between wanting to get paid for your time
Yeah.
speaking in English, but also getting that extra language exchange. I will mention that CIE does have immersion options. We have 2 week and 4 week immersion. So if you're looking to really hit the ground running with learning Spanish right off the bat, we do have those options. I think that's pretty cool. As adults, we don't really ever get the chance to do a homestay and intensive Spanish classes.
Right.
So if you're into that, definitely check out those options. But of course, you're living in Spain, so there's tons of opportunities. And I think it is what you make of it.
Totally.
I also think too, as an expectation, to not be so hard on yourself. If the point is to learn some of the language, right? But putting all of your marbles into being completely fluent in the language, I feel like is really intense. And
Yeah.
you don't have to be so hard on yourself. So the more that you learn, the better. The more fun you're gonna have. And you
And the
don't
more
have
you're
to.
gonna learn, I think
Yeah,
like the less yourself, the more you're gonna learn. I've seen that with like my own students at school. Like they have the least pressure on themselves when it comes to learning English because they're only 8. But
yeah.
because they have like no pressure on them, they are not afraid to make mistakes. And when I talk to them, they are so confident that they know what I'm saying, and then they'll go and do the opposite, and they have no idea what I really just said. But that's how they learn.
Right.
So I think like when you totally let go of that judgment on yourself is when you actually become a bit more of a sponge and you're able to like be willing to make those mistakes and learn more.
Totally, totally. Yeah, do not be afraid of making mistakes. That was my biggest downfall, was that I was so afraid of committing grammatical errors in Spanish that I never talked with anyone. And so you got to flip the switch on that one
Oh,
quite a bit.
I'm butchering it constantly all the
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
and no worries.
Yeah.
They'll get past
Yeah.
it. They'll get past it.
Yeah.
Great. Well, the last one before you wrap things up is I want a school placement in the Madrid city center.
Um, that is an interesting expectation only
Mm,
because I also felt that that's what I wanted. But it's
mm,
kind of because I think before you come here, you have this understanding of like, you want to be in Madrid, you want to be in the midst of everything, you want to be in the city the whole time. And while that might be true and you do want to experience a lot of what goes on in the middle of the city, I have become really attached to my placement, which is
mm.
about an hour away. And It's about an hour away door to door. So like I would say it would take a 20-minute car ride, but because I have to take a metro, a train, and a bus, it does end up becoming like an hour. And I love it. And I say like you're the style of people that are outside the city are different than the style of people that you will find inside the city. And I think the kids are a lot more like just from what I've heard of my friends who are inside the city, they're they don't hear English as often because
Mm.
their only real exposure to English is when they're in school. So like they marvel at the things we say and they're so much more motivated to learn it, I think, because it's like this complete foreign concept to them where like oftentimes students in the middle of the city center, they're like tourists, like it's kind of like easy for them to brush off. Um,
Yeah.
and on top of that, it's really hard to get placed in the middle of the city center because there's only so many schools
Hmm.
there. So I think coming in with that expectation is extremely unrealistic, and it's better to come in with open eyes and anticipate being a little further outside the city than it is to just hope and pray that that's where you end up. And I found so much good in where my little school is. At I'm in Hatafe, which is like not even like the middle of nowhere, but it's like about an hour away. And the people there are so nice. They really appreciate our help. Me and my roommate Grace actually got like a tutoring job there because they don't know anyone else who speaks English.
Mm.
So they're just like looking for our help. Um, yeah, I would definitely come in with that expectation that you're probably not going to be in the middle of the city center and to anticipate like about a 40-minute commute. But I love my commute. I call my mom, I listen to my music. It's like you spend your time alone. I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. Yeah, I could not agree more. I was very attached to my school placement. I think not only because of the students, but also because of the co-teachers that I got to work with.
Yeah.
And then I actually had a unique experience where there was six of us language assistants all at the same school. And so
Wow.
it was really cool to have kind of that companionship, but also be working with local teachers. So yeah, I would not have changed that experience for the world. My school placement was really far away. I was in Arroyo Molinos, which is about like an hour and some change away from the city center. So yeah, it was a trek out there, but at the end of the day, I only did that 4 times a week. And then the
Right.
other 3 days a week, I was just, local around where I was staying. I was living more north in Madrid. So yeah, I mean, I think you got to keep your mind open with that because every student, this is kind of the idea of the program that you're participating in when you teach abroad in Spain, is that every student deserves to have, a language assistant that's helping them with their English abilities at school. And
Right.
so the placements are all around Madrid, and so you get to help be that force
Yeah.
in the school to help them learn English, which is a cool opportunity too.
Yeah.
So.
And the schools, I think, outside the city are a lot smaller
Mhm.
because there's less populated. And I can't speak on the experience of teaching within the city center, but I just know that my school itself is so small. There's only
Mhm.
like two classes of each grade, and it only goes from like infantile to third grade.
Mm.
So by now, I seriously know every kid's name, and they know my name, which I think makes the experience all the more worthwhile instead of just not knowing students' names and like going through the motions and being in the middle of a big city school, being on like an outer city school, it really feels like you're actually making a difference because you're actually gaining like an interpersonal relationship with
Totally.
them.
Totally. Yeah. So be open to your school experience. Be open to the experience at all. I think that was the last expectation. I know we're already over kind of our 30-minute mark. Do you have any last comments, last piece of advice for folks that are looking to teach in
Right.
Spain in the future?
I would say drop the expectations, but like set goals for yourself instead.
Mm.
Because I think like when you come into it with goals instead of expectations, the goals are something like you can work for yourself, and
Mm.
expectations are things that like you have no control over. So if you come into it with like expectations, you're bound to be disappointed in some way. But if you come into it with goals instead, like those are things that you can work towards and achieve yourself, like getting better at Spanish, making new friends, like really helping kids with English and like doing things to better yourself in like other ways that maybe you weren't doing back in America, and just like traveling and getting yourself to be more experienced in the world in general. If you come into those with goals like that instead of expectations that you might not end up having control over, I think it totally changes the mindset of your experience and you'll have an awesome time.
Yeah, that is some golden advice right there.
Thank
Love it.
you.
Yeah, someone said, well said. Yes,
Thank
absolutely. I have no more to say. I will not overstep on that. That was great. Thank you so much, Grace, for sharing your words of wisdom.
Of
Um,
course.
and if you guys have any other questions, please let us know. Send us a DM. You can message Grace directly if you want to. But we'll catch you next time. Bye, guys.
Great. Bye, guys. Thank you.
Bye.